morning. Our question was, Demaryius Thomas skipping the camp for Peyton Manning over at Duke. And this is what Irish Clan 5 had to say. His way of holding out because he was franchised. It is really, in semantics, it's a holdout, even though this is all voluntary. Right.
It's the only leverage he has to force their hand to say, I'm not going to show up until you give me a long-term deal. It's the only minimal leverage he has in this situation. And then ultimately, when it gets to July 15th, if he doesn't sign, he starts losing money.
For those that don't know, how far can this go? Let's say he decides, I'm not going to go to training camp.
Well, it could go all the way, it could go months. But most guys can't absorb the financial hit.
Right.
So most holdouts, I mean, even you go back to Emmitt Smith or even high-profile holdouts, typically end before the season, obviously, but they typically last 2 weeks.
Right.
Maybe 3, because you start losing chunks of money.
Right.
Eventually, the athlete says, I need to get on the field. I'm not making any money. And often it's the people around him who put pressure on him to say, because he might be the one meal ticket. But I would say, I can't see him holding out into training camp right now.
Into training camp?
I think he's going to be there July 15th, that he will be at training camp the first day.
Whether he signs the...
to be at training camp, he has to have signed the tender, the franchise number on July 15th, which is before training camp. He has to sign by July 15th on that.
Okay.
So I do believe that will happen.
What was the situation with Clady? He signed the franchise tag and then they negotiated?
I'm not sure if he ever signed. My guess is he did not, because once he did, he's obligated to show he's under contract. Demaryius technically is not under contract right now because he hasn't signed it. So once you sign it,
then you have to go.
So that's again their only leverage. Don't sign it. I'm kind of making my stand. I'm not going to sign this because I want something else. Well, eventually, it reaches that deadline spur action. Everyone say, when's it going to happen? Deadline spur action.
Personally,
you see it all the time.
You know, I can go both ways on this. Personally, I think he should sign it and go play. Hope he doesn't get injured. It's still $13 million, and you know what? If he has a really good season, and I would like to think that he would, he's going to get a payday, and he's going to look at the Broncos and say, you know what? I'm out of here. I don't want to be here anymore. I'll make my money someplace.
But they can franchise him again next year.
They won't do that. I'd be very surprised. Do you think Elway wants to go through this again?
Well, depending on how this year goes.
They have to get Von Miller under contract.
Too. I agree. It would be more difficult. The back-to-back franchise tags are rare.
Did it happen to Lawyer Malloy?
I think it happened to Sue, didn't it? And they were.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, it's just back-to-back franchise tags are rare because of the way you have to fit in the top 5 of your position. It gets really, really expensive.
You brought up a great line. I don't know if it's an original line from you, but it was so funny. I told it on the show yesterday. John Elway is not. You said Scott Boras is the type of guy in a negotiation who's willing to kill the hostage.
Yes.
Do you believe John Elway is the same way?
With certain players, yes. Not across the board. Where Scott is across the board. He's not afraid to kill the hostage. Whether it's Kevin Millwood, whether it's Carlos Beltran, whether it's Chris Bryant. Where John, I think it's more of a slaw. It's depending on the guy.
Well, let's talk about this guy.
Scott's straight across the board.
We only have about 30 seconds left. Let's talk about this guy, Demaryius Thomas. Is he willing to kill the hostage? I know he wants Demaryius Thomas back.
I just don't. It's a non-issue this year. But are you asking me, would they get to a point where they would not give him a long-term deal?
Yes.
That is very possible that they will not give him a long-term deal, because there is a line in the sand here that they're not going to cross. They're not going to cave. It has to be a bridging and a meeting of a compromise. The Broncos are not going to cave in and just say, Demaryius, highest paid receiver in the history of the NFL. That's not going to happen here. And you've seen it with their fiscal restraint this offseason, Eric.